How deep can deception reach? How long can one hide darkness behind a facade of light? The main character of this story knows the answers to all questions, but prefers to remain silent. He has masterfully created the image of a righteous citizen, behind which hid a person with monstrous inclinations. In the year 2008, Nicholas Browning turned 15 years old. A boy like any other, good student, exemplary behavior. The oldest son in the family of John and Tammy. The father, a successful real estate lawyer in a large firm, an activist, scout leader, Sunday school teacher. In the local community, he was respected. Many knew him. The mother, a housewife, quiet and modest. Nicholas had two younger brothers, 11 and 13 years old. The family lived in a spacious house in Cockeysville, Maryland, a city with about 20,000 inhabitants. A quiet, peaceful place, the last where one would expect upheavals. Nicholas, a model student, scout, attended middle school. Tall, good-looking, played on the school golf and lacrosse teams. Many prophesied a brilliant future for him. From the outside, everything seemed to run smoothly in the family, until the day when everything changed. On the 2nd of February 2008, the parents drove Nicholas in the car during the day. They dropped him off at a friend's house, where an overnight stay of a group of teenagers was planned. They wanted to watch movies and spend time with games. Nicholas got out at Ryan Fingal's house. Taylor Tewksbury and Alexander Smith also arrived there, all boys of the same age, 15 years. The Browning family was never seen by anyone after that. The next morning, the boys who had stayed overnight at Ryan's wanted to part ways. The parents had promised to pick up Nicholas, but did not come on time. He tried to call, to understand what had happened, but the Brownings did not answer. Thereupon, the teenagers drove with Ryan's father to a shopping center. After shopping, they brought Nicholas home. On the way, he continued trying to call his parents and write to them, but without success. When they arrived at Nicholas's house, they immediately noticed the family car in the driveway. An unusual silence reigned in the house. When the Browning son entered, he was confronted with a shocking scene. The entire family was found unconscious. His 45-year-old father, John Browning, his 44-year-old mother, Tammy, and his two younger brothers, 13-year-old Gregory and 11-year-old Benjamin, lay motionless. Nicholas called Ryan's father, who was waiting outside. The man immediately contacted emergency 911 and reported the situation. The investigators arrived at the crime scene in the shortest time. They found the teenagers in the courtyard of the house. The boys seemed agitated, but Nicholas appeared unnaturally calm. He immediately brought forward a version of attempted enrichment. According to his words, while he was staying overnight with friends, a perpetrator had broken into the house, and the situation had gotten out of control. The boy suspected that the parents might have disturbed the perpetrator's plans, which led to the tragic consequences. However, the investigation of the crime scene revealed no signs of a struggle. The investigators found 4 injured people in different parts of the house. Each of them had suffered a single injury. A superficial search of the rooms showed that nothing had disappeared from the house. The furniture remained untouched. Numerous visible valuables were in their place. There were no signs of a break-in or disorder, which raised doubts about the version of a failed robbery attempt. At the same time, Nicholas's behavior aroused the investigators' suspicion. Despite the young age of the teenagers and a possible state of shock, all 4 boys were brought to the station for further investigation. They had to undergo a questioning procedure. The teenagers were placed in different rooms for individual conversations. The investigators began with Taylor. He immediately drew the investigators' attention through his behavior. He was nervous, fidgeted in his chair, and hesitated with his answers, spoke uncertainly. He was chosen first, assuming that he might be more open to a conversation. The other teenagers seemed more self-confident, especially Nicholas. Taylor told that the four of them had stayed overnight at Ryan's. They came there the evening before the incident directly after class together with the house owner, while Alex and Nicholas arrived later. The boys watched movies until late at night and played computer games until Ryan's parents sent everyone to sleep. During the night, he noticed nothing unusual. After that, the investigator decided to take a break and question Nicholas in another room. The officer noticed Nicholas's strange behavior. When he entered the office, he simply sat there, head lowered. He seemed very calm, even sleepy, which appeared unusual given the events in his family. The policeman tried to create a friendly atmosphere by presenting the conversation as a routine witness questioning. He hoped that the student would be open and not insist on the presence of a lawyer. The officer wanted to obtain information without the involvement of a defender so as not to complicate the process. Nicholas remained composed. He told that he returned from school around 14:45. Then his parents brought him to Ryan's. Normally, the boys walked to each other. They lived close to each other, less than a kilometer away. But on this day, his parents simply dropped him off on the way. Nick confirmed Taylor's statement about the evening. They played, watched movies, and then went to sleep. However, he admitted that around 1 o'clock at night he left his friend's house and went to his parents'. According to his words, he planned to take the family car for a drive with friends, without informing his parents. When he arrived home, he noticed light in the window of the parental bedroom. At this point, he was already in the car and hid on the floor of the back seat. Nick was worried that he might draw his parents' attention through noise when he tried to open the car, but did not want to face his strict father's displeasure. Nicholas decided to wait until the relatives had calmed down and gone to sleep. He did not want to take the family car openly to avoid additional problems. When he got into the car, he fell asleep unnoticed. Presumably something terrible happened in the house during this time. Nick heard nothing according to his own account and simply left when he woke up. According to expert opinion, the tragic events in the Browning family occurred around midnight. All family members were surprised. The first to be affected was the family head, John, who was sleeping downstairs on the couch. Tammy Browning and the two sons who were on the first floor also could not wake up in time. The investigators suspected that Nicholas was hiding something. The investigators found his decision to hide in the family car instead of immediately returning to Ryan strange. Moreover, he was the only one from the family whom misfortune did not strike, although he was nearby at the time of the tragedy. Nick's statement that he had heard nothing also aroused doubts. His mention of the switched-on light was disturbing, since when the police arrived, the house was dark. Given the theory of material enrichment, it was incomprehensible why the perpetrators should turn on the light and then turn it off again. Normally, perpetrators do not have time for that. The suspect could not explain these inconsistencies. During Ryan's questioning, it turned out that he had fallen asleep in the evening and woken up around midnight. According to his words, Nick was no longer at home at this time. The investigators discovered a temporal discrepancy that could indicate the incredibility of the teenager's statements, because Nick claimed he had left his friends at 1 o'clock at night. All of this coincided with the period of the tragic events in his family. The investigators, noticing inconsistencies in the statements, decided to speak with Taylor again. Initially, the young man had claimed that Nicholas had left Ryan's house around midnight. However, when he was told about the time intervals mentioned by other teenagers, Taylor suddenly changed his version. Now he insisted that his friend had still been in the house at midnight. It was obvious how nervous the teenager was, as if he was trying to hide something. An experienced police officer managed to calm the young man down, and he admitted that he had gone to sleep immediately after Nick's departure. Taylor knew about his friend's intention to use his parents' car without permission, but could not imagine that the situation would take such a serious turn. With this new information, the investigators turned to Nicholas again. Confronted with the updated witness statements from his friends, the teenager changed his story. Now he claimed to have left his friend's house and set off home around 1:30 in the morning, to get the car. He also added a new detail. The light in the house was originally on, but when he woke up, it was switched off. According to his words, strangers who had broken into the house could have done this. This version of events raised doubts. Why hide in the car when one could simply have gone away or waited aside? Nick insisted on having fallen asleep in the car, but how could he not have heard the loud noises? This time, the young man specified that he was awakened around 5 o'clock in the morning by a call from his friend Alex, and without going home, returned to his friends. However, Alex's statements caused even more confusion. Initially, he explained that Nick had not left the house at all that night, but when he was told the words of the other friends, he changed his version. According to Alex's new statement, Nicholas left the house at 23:45, but Alex himself fell asleep around midnight and did not wake up until 5 o'clock in the morning. When Alex noticed Nick's absence, he called him. He admitted that his friend had planned to secretly break into the parental house to get the car keys. But this raised new questions. How could Nick be in the car without keys? In a night full of interrogations, the investigators received statements from all the teenagers, but all were questionable due to contradictions. An unexpected turn in the investigations occurred when Mr. Petcher, Ryan's stepfather, with whom the friends had spent the night, came to the station. He shared an important detail. Nick's parents were supposed to pick him up at 9 o'clock in the morning so he could help at home. However, at the agreed time, nobody came, and no call was made either. The morning began unusually. Although suspicion against Nicholas intensified, he tried to appear casual and even allowed himself occasional jokes during the conversations. The investigators suspected that this was an attempt to mislead them. The young man acted innocent, but the investigators sensed that something else was hidden behind this mask. Ryan's stepfather noticed Nick's strange behavior. He was not worried about his parents' absence in the morning and strangely did not hurry to go home, although it was only a 20-minute walk. Instead, he went to the shopping center with his friend and his father and continued trying to reach his parents. They only drove past home on the way back. The law enforcement agencies saw confirmation of their suspicions in this behavior. It seemed as if Nicholas was deliberately delaying the moment of returning home. When Ryan's stepfather brought the teenagers to Nicholas's house, the friends entered it through the garage. Nicholas himself invited his friends to enter with him, which appeared unusual. He drew everyone's attention to the open door and emphasized that it was customary in their family to close the doors. According to the friend's stepfather, Nick highlighted this several times before entering. They went through the living room, Nicholas in front. First, he saw his father on the sofa. The protagonist of the story called the others over. When they saw what had happened, the friends immediately ran out and refused to go further. The students told Ryan's stepfather what they had seen. The man, incredulous, entered the house himself. When he saw John's condition, he immediately called the emergency services. In the meantime, Nick went upstairs and found his mother and brothers in a similarly alarming condition. Nicholas confirmed all these details during questioning, but the police officers were disturbed by his extraordinary calm. It seemed as if he showed no emotions, which did not correspond to the behavior of a person who had just lost relatives. Ryan told that Nick came to the others on the street after discovering the incident and calmly told them about it. The teenagers were afraid to go inside because they did not want to see what had happened. Nicholas informed Ryan's stepfather and the friends about the suspicion of a theft of valuables, but remained completely calm, which surprised everyone. The other teenagers confirmed that as soon as they saw Mr. Browning in the living room, they immediately ran out through the garage. Then they circled the house through the courtyard, hoping to find clues and understand what had happened, but discovered nothing. Nicholas decided to inspect the house and went to the back entrance. There he discovered his game console and his laptop on the billiard table. The teenagers suspected that the uninvited guests wanted to take these items, but something had prevented them. When the investigators heard this, They doubted the version of a break-in by strangers. They understood that Nicholas was probably trying to mislead them. After all, real criminals would surely have taken the valuable devices that were lying around openly. The officers continued their rounds in the neighborhood and questioned the residents in search of eyewitnesses and important information. Thus, the story of the Browning family became known to the public. People were shocked by what had happened and tried to understand what had really occurred. Later, in an attempt to justify himself, Nick confessed that the car keys had been in his jacket the whole time. He remembered this when he was visiting a friend and then decided to use the car without permission. The investigators were puzzled why the young man had not told this immediately and suspected that he was again concealing something. All doubts were dispelled by Alex's memory. He told that Nicholas had called home the evening before and asked the brothers to leave the back door open. For what purpose was unclear. After that, the investigators had hardly any doubt about the teenager's involvement in the disappearance of his relatives. Nick told the investigators that his father owned 2 types of hunting equipment and sometimes took him hunting. Friends of the suspect also reported several arguments between Nicholas and his father about alcohol consumption. Nicholas himself claimed that a person lived nearby who was capable of such actions. There was talk of a neighbor named Bobby who consumed prohibited substances and often violated the law. However, the investigators considered this an attempt to divert suspicion from himself. There was no evidence against Bobby, and moreover, he had a solid alibi. When the investigators openly confronted Nicholas with their suspicion, the young man became visibly nervous but continued to insist on his innocence. The officers applied various interrogation tactics to confirm their assumptions, but without success. At this point, experts had determined that an object from the affected person's safe in the house was missing. According to expert opinion, such equipment could have been used in the incident. The investigators tried to clarify the whereabouts of the missing object. The conversation with the suspect lasted about 6 hours. Despite the persistent questions from the investigators, Nicholas continued to deny any involvement. However, the longer the interrogation lasted, the more the young man's statements changed. In the course of the investigation, it turned out that the parents' relationship with their older son Nick had become particularly tense recently. When he felt cornered, Nicholas told about the complicated relationship with his parents. According to his words, he had been subjected to moral pressure and strict punishments for years. During the interrogation, Nicholas inquired several times about the possibility of treatment in a psychiatric clinic instead of a prison sentence. The investigators avoided a direct answer, but this interest from the young man aroused suspicion. It seemed as if he was aware of his guilt and hoped for a reduction in punishment. Nevertheless, Nick openly declared toward the end of the interrogation that he was convinced the jury would believe his story. Despite the existing evidence against Nick, the investigators lacked understanding of the motives. Friends of the suspect reported that Nick had a conflict with his father shortly before the incident. The young man described several episodes in which his father was excessively strict with him and applied harsh educational measures. He stated that their relationship had significantly deteriorated compared to last autumn. One of the reasons was an incident in which the young man had taken the family car without permission. Puberty was negatively affecting Nick's behavior, which provoked the parents' dissatisfaction. The father adhered to strict educational methods to correct his son's behavior. Nicholas claimed to have been repeatedly subjected to harsh punishments. According to the student's statement, the situation reached its peak on the day when, after another conflict with his father, he went to friends because he refused to go visiting with his parents. The investigators suspected that the root of the problem lay in the teenager's complicated relationship with his parents. Nicholas's friends told that he had entered puberty and began to show disobedience, which predictably provoked the parents' dissatisfaction. The relationship with his father became particularly tense after he caught his son drinking alcohol several times. Nicholas himself justified himself by saying that he was trying to escape from his problems this way. Some of Nick's relatives confirmed these words and described his father as a man with strict rules. but even they doubted that he would use physical violence against his son without reason. In conversations with classmates and the suspect's close circle, the investigators discovered that the prerequisites for the tragic events had emerged long before the fateful day. It remained unclear why the mother and brothers were harmed, who apparently had not caused Nick any harm. His friends, with whom he had spent time on that unfortunate night, confirmed that they had heard Nick say jokingly several times that he would harm his family. He said he hated his parents. However, nobody took these words seriously. Many classmates heard his stories about how he could no longer bear his father's harsh treatment and psychological pressure. Yet most described Nick as a diligent student, a quiet and good-natured guy. Nevertheless, his close friends also knew another side of his personality. Outside of school, the young man often treated his younger brothers roughly, secretly took alcohol from his father's bar, and used the family car without permission. Moreover, it turned out that he also behaved inappropriately toward strangers. In particular, he showed aggression toward younger students and people with developmental disabilities. As it later turned out, after the tragic events and his return to his friend's house, Nicholas began inviting classmates to a party at his house. Its implementation was supposed to coincide with the time when what had happened would be discovered. Obviously, the teenager was trying to divert suspicion from himself this way. In fact, teenagers from school began coming here while the crime scene technicians were working in the Brownings' house. Nicholas had invited them to a party. They were all shocked when they learned the true reason for its cancellation. Finally, Nicholas could not withstand the pressure and revealed himself. He confessed his involvement in the tragic events in the family, but told a completely unbelievable story. He explained everything with an unexpected fit of rage that he could not cope with. Nicholas also showed the law enforcement officers the place where he had hidden the equipment. It was found in the bushes on the Brownings' property. The investigation confirmed that exactly this weapon was used on that fateful night, and DNA traces of the suspect were found on it. Thereupon, Nicholas was officially charged with 4 particularly serious crimes. Many acquaintances perceived Nicholas so positively that after the incident they repeatedly sent clemency petitions to the court. One of these letters came from his grandfather. He claimed his grandson had suffered for years under his father's strict treatment. Some even refused to believe that Nick was involved in this terrible incident. Awaiting trial, a few days before its beginning, Nick was in custody and was talking on the phone with a friend. Of course, the conversation was monitored. During the conversation, the teenager joked about the possibility of escape. The impression was created that he still had not grasped the severity of his act. During the hearings, however, the situation changed drastically. At one point, Nicholas could not hold back his emotions, turned to his relatives in tears, and expressed his deep regret about what had happened. During the court proceedings, the prosecution and defense presented 2 opposing pictures of Nicholas's personality. The prosecutors emphasized the discrepancy between his public image and the witnesses' statements about his hidden inclinations. The lawyers, on the other hand, highlighted the positive sides of the young man: his academic achievements, his engagement with the Scouts, and his active attitude toward life. Nicholas's emotional state in court was so unstable that he was unable to read his apology speech himself. His defender had to take over this task. Later, however, during a phone conversation with his girlfriend Stephanie, the young man expressed completely different feelings and showed a negative attitude toward the justice system. One of the defendant's friends, Ryan, suggested a financial background to the incident. He pointed to the family's wealth and the presence of insurance, which could have secured Nicholas the sole right to inheritance. Nicholas's defense took an unexpected turn when he began speaking of inappropriate treatment by both parents. While the father's strictness still seemed credible, the accusations against the mother met with general mistrust. The Brownings had the reputation of respected and esteemed members of society. Nobody in their circle noticed signs of physical impact on Nicholas or episodes of psychological pressure. Close family friends, however, noted that the adolescent's behavior had recently become increasingly uncontrollable and unpredictable, which worried both parents. The defense's attempt to invoke Nicholas's mental incompetence was quickly rejected. During conversations with the investigators, the young man showed no signs of mental deviations and no cases of disorders or mental health problems were documented in his past. At this time, Nick's defender insisted on placing the teenager in a special facility with a rehabilitation program for minors. The lawyer emphasized that the young man's motives did not appear convincing. Even if it had been about financial advantage, he could not have used it until reaching majority. Moreover, through his actions, Nick condemned himself to a life in a children's home or with foster families, which could prove even more difficult than the situation he reported when describing the problems in his family. Despite the defense's arguments, a medical expert opinion declared the teenager fit for trial. This took away the lawyer's opportunity to build the defense based on his client's mental state. Given the severity of the accusations, Nick's position became extremely vulnerable. However, his young age excluded the application of the strictest punitive measures. In January 2009, Nicholas entered into a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to all charges. The court imposed the sentence, 4 life sentences, 2 of which were to be served consecutively. Due to his young age and guilty plea, Nick received the opportunity to file an application for early release in the year 2031, after 23 years of imprisonment. The main condition for maintaining this right is exemplary behavior. Currently, Nicholas Browning is serving his sentence at Cumberland Correctional Institution in the state of Maryland. In the year 2014, his application for review of the verdict was rejected. It is important to note that for the release of persons serving a life sentence, the consent of the state governor is required. Since 1994, however, there have been no such cases, which calls into question the possibility of Nick's release. In the summer of 2022, the 30-year-old Nicholas created a profile on a dating website and added his photos. His goal was to find conversation partners for confidential communication. In his profile, he told about his achievements. During his imprisonment, he has not only completed school but also acquired a bachelor's degree and is now working on his MBA degree. He ends his story with the words, "I have done my best to create some kind of life here. I have been incredibly lucky to have friends who have taught me so much and shown me so much love. They have helped me grow out of the frightened, angry, and broken child that I was." Normally, parents hope that their care for their children will bring good things in the future. But sometimes when trying to protect one's child from mistakes, one can imperceptibly cross a dangerous line behind which terrible consequences are hidden. On the morning of the 15th of March 2015, patrol officers near the town of South Whitehall in Pennsylvania, USA, noticed a strange Ford Freestyle that was half submerged in a pond. They decided to check it, shone flashlights into it, and saw several suspicious stains. The doors were open, and the law enforcement officers were hit by a sharp smell of cleaning agents. Despite attempts to clean the interior, traces of something unusual still remained. The car belonged to 54-year-old Cheryl Silvennik. One of the officers noticed disturbed earth nearby. Upon examination, they discovered something disturbing. Experts confirmed that it was Cheryl. She showed numerous injuries, especially in the neck area. The traces indicated a violent attack and the victim's struggle for survival. According to the expert's assessment, Cheryl had stopped showing signs of life several hours before the arrival of the patrol officers. It seemed as if the perpetrator had tried to sink the car along with its contents. But due to the unstable shore, the car had simply gotten stuck in the mud. It seems as if the perpetrator had tried in panic to erase the traces of his deed, but that did not help. Given the nature of the incident, the investigators immediately suspected that it must be someone from the woman's close circle. When the investigators arrived at Cheryl's address to inform the relatives about the incident, they found her husband at home, who had slept all night without suspecting the tragedy. A young daughter also lived in the house who had a relationship with an older boy. The young man and the husband immediately came under suspicion, but the truth turned out to be even more shocking. Cheryl was married and was raising 2 children. Her husband was named David. David worked as a pharmacist in the local pharmacy and Cheryl worked in the city hospital. Their older son was already studying at college. In the year 2001, daughter Jamie was born, who became her father's real favorite. From a young age, Jamie was closer to her father than to her mother. They shared common interests: fishing, hunting, and love of motorcycles. At school, Jamie easily found friends, was sociable, and learned well. But in the teenage years, a phase of rebellion began that led to frequent conflicts in the family, especially with the mother. Toward the end of the year 2014, the situation came to a head. Jamie became more withdrawn, communicated less with her family, even with her father. She began to regularly leave home and refused to say where and with whom she spent her time. The situation repeated itself again and again. School grades deteriorated, and the young rebel even insisted on living with friends in a rental apartment for several months. The parents convinced her with difficulty to return home until March 2015. Cheryl did not understand the reasons for her daughter's abrupt mood and behavior changes until she finally discovered the truth. It turned out that the daughter had met a significantly older admirer during her stay with friends. For her age, this age difference was considerable. The mother sensed that this could end badly. Cheryl was against this relationship, but the daughter did not listen to her, which only intensified the family conflicts. It came to light that Jamie had fallen in love with a soldier named Caleb Barnes from a barracks in Maryland. Their acquaintance had begun long before these events at a rock festival that Jamie had gone to with friends. There she met Caleb thanks to a mutual acquaintance. They wrote to each other on social networks and by text message, talked often on the phone, and met when Caleb was in town. Exactly at this time, the relationships with the family began to deteriorate as Jamie was afraid of being discovered. She knew that her parents would not approve of contact with an older young man. This is exactly what happened, but only a year later, when the connection between the young people had become stronger. In early May 2015, Cheryl discovered her daughter Jamie's secret correspondence with a certain Caleb. It turned out that they met often. In trying to find out more, the mother learned that this was an adult man, which greatly troubled her. When Jamie understood that they had been discovered, she tried to deceive her mother by saying that Caleb was only 16. But Cheryl knew that he served in the army and therefore must be older. When she learned the truth about the man's age, the woman was shocked by the situation Jamie had gotten into. Cheryl made contact with 20-year-old Caleb. He pretended that he had thought Jamie would soon turn 18. In reality, he had known the truth for a long time, but decided to continue the relationship secretly. The mother explained to Caleb that his behavior could lead to serious consequences. The young man played along and pretended to agree to break off contact, but this turned out to be untrue. The couple in love continued to meet, proceeding even more carefully. About a week before the tragic event, Cheryl caught the couple together in the basement of the house. The angry woman threw Caleb out and threatened to go to the police. Later, they had a brief telephone conversation whose content remained unknown. Probably the mother tried to convince the young man to break off contact with Jamie. She did not suspect how serious the situation had become and that her daughter was expecting a child. Shortly afterward, Caleb made telephone contact with Jamie. A few days after their conversation, the tragic incident with Cheryl occurred. Now the investigators faced a situation where a woman had been harmed who had tried to protect her daughter. A suspicion arose. Could the two lovers have planned this terrible incident to remove an obstacle on the path to their happiness? Unfortunately, such stories are not uncommon. After the police learned about the young people's relationship, they focused on Caleb as the main suspect, but also did not exclude Jamie from the circle of suspects. During their first visit to the Silvennik house, the officers noticed scratches on Jamie's arms and some abrasions on her face, which strengthened the suspicion of her involvement. A deep cut on his right hand was also discovered on Caleb. The suspicious circumstances against the young couple intensified, and the investigators continued to gather information about them. It turned out that Jamie had asked her mother several days before the incident to let her go to a festival in neighboring Scranton. She insisted on going alone, but the mother was naturally against it and worried about her daughter's safety. The investigators examined all the correspondence between the young couple and Cheryl. In one of the conversations on this topic when the young woman was at school, the mother wrote that she would not approve of this relationship until her daughter was an adult. The daughter tried to put pressure on the mother by threatening displeasure or leaving the house. In the end, she prevailed. The mother gave in and even agreed to drive her. Cheryl wanted to use the trip to clarify the situation between the young people. After the mother's ultimatum, the young woman angrily wrote to her boyfriend that she wished the mother would disappear. He agreed that this would solve the problems. From the communication, it became clear that Jamie was expecting offspring. She responded to the mother with agreement to the proposal. They arranged that the woman would drive the couple to a concert in the neighboring town in the evening after class. Then there was a disturbing correspondence between the young people that looked like a discussion about something evil. It was planned that Cheryl would bring them by car. She did not intend to attend the event and wanted to wait in the car. After that, all three should return home. According to the plan, Jamie wanted to do something terrible to her mother, exactly then. After they had read these messages, the law enforcement officers were convinced of the involvement of both in the incident. Now they had to prove it. The examination of the car showed that something terrible had happened inside, as hinted at in the correspondence. Cheryl became the victim of a violent crime that led to a tragic outcome within a few minutes. According to the investigations, both participants calmly ate dinner at a fast food restaurant afterwards. Then they went to a store where they bought cleaning supplies, bleach, and gloves. It seems that all these actions were aimed at covering up traces. The young people were captured by surveillance cameras of a Walmart store. After viewing the footage, the law enforcement representatives were shocked. The young woman seemed even more cheerful than usual, as if her mother's absence pleased her. She showed no remorse about what had happened, but on the contrary seemed satisfied with the possibility of seeing her older boyfriend unhindered. The couple returned to the scene and tried to eliminate traces in the interior, but this proved difficult, and they abandoned this attempt. They tried to dispose of the car in a body of water, but it did not sink, which is why they had to resort to other measures. From the correspondence, it became known that they had originally planned to flee to another state, but they discarded this idea because they knew they would immediately become prime suspects. Nevertheless, this did not help them escape suspicion. On the evening of the incident, the young woman's father, David, harbored no suspicion. The man had sleep problems and took a sleeping pill. Knowing that his wife and daughter would not return until morning, he slept peacefully all night without suspecting what was happening. David only learned of the incident the next day when traces of what had happened were discovered. He did not suspect that he himself could have been in danger. Jamie and her boyfriend were arrested and charged with a serious crime and concealment of evidence. Initially, it was assumed that the attacker was a military member. It was assumed that the young woman could hardly cope with an adult woman, but despite clear signs of struggle, the young man had no visible injuries except for a wound on his hand. It turned out that he was sitting in the back seat, which made his actions difficult. According to the expert's opinion, the impact on Cheryl came from the right. The position indicated that the actions were carried out by someone who was sitting in the passenger seat, where Jamie, the victim's daughter, was located. The young woman had a damaged fingernail, and traces of a struggle could be seen on her hands and face. It became clear that the young man possibly played a lesser role in this incident than originally assumed. The main role probably belonged to Jamie. Only conversations could help clarify the situation. During the conversation with the law enforcement officers, Caleb gave confused and contradictory statements. At first, he claimed not to know what had happened to Cheryl, but when he was told about the joint trip, he changed his story. Now he admitted that the three of them were at the festival and Cheryl had driven them. According to his words, the woman brought them home. He got out and went to sleep without noticing anything unusual. The young man claimed he could not have imagined such an outcome of the trip and believed his girlfriend was not capable of such a thing. Caleb insisted on his innocence and seemed to defend the girl. However, when he learned about the uncovered correspondence with Jamie, he began to shift responsibility onto her. He told that he had left Jamie and her mother in the car to talk while he went for a walk. When he returned, he saw the motionless Cheryl and Jamie with traces of the incident. He admitted to helping cover up traces but denied involvement in the incident itself. Jamie also initially said she did not know who could have done something to her mother, but her story changed during the course of the conversation. Finally, she said her mother had driven her to Caleb and then driven away. It was suspected that the incident happened when the lady was going home alone and was attacked by a stranger. During the interrogations, the young person often cried and spoke of her love for her mother, but this turned out to be untrue. The collected evidence clearly pointed to her involvement in the incident. At the time of arrest, the traces of the struggle on the young woman had not yet healed, which clearly indicated her involvement, but she denied her guilt and invented various excuses. Near the crime scene, a sharp object was found that had been thrown away about 10 meters away. Experts discovered traces of two people on it. On the blade were traces of Cheryl, and on the handle, prints of Jamie. This confirmed the investigators' version about the daughter's involvement in the incident with the mother. The prosecution assumed that the woman wanted to use the trip to the festival to get closer to the young people and discuss their relationships. She wanted to protect her daughter from youthful sins without suspecting the plan being plotted against her. The investigators examined the correspondence of the arrested couple. It turned out that Jamie was the initiator of the incident and did not intend to stop. In one of the dialogues, she insisted on eliminating not only the mother, but also the father, who could disturb her happiness. Without knowing it, Jamie's beloved father was in danger. David was informed about the plan plotted against him. Although the father was also affected, he could not come to terms with what had happened. The man tried until the last to defend his daughter. He criticized the US justice system for the intention to try Jamie as an adult. The father believed that his daughter, even if she was involved in the incident, due to her young age, had not understood the consequences of her actions. In his opinion, Jamie needed a special facility for young people that would give her a chance for future improvement. When these arguments did not convince the police, he insisted on the necessity of a psychiatric examination for Jamie, as he suspected health problems in her. The examination was conducted, but the experts found no abnormalities, and the thesis of insanity was dropped. After that, David denounced the media, which in his opinion had unjustly tarnished his daughter's image. The man stubbornly insisted on the view that she could neither be the initiator nor the main participant of the regrettable events. In the father's opinion, all the guilt lay with Caleb, who had strongly influenced Jamie and turned her against her mother. Many facts, however, contradicted this version. Despite her young age, Jamie was distinguished by high intelligence and adult behavior. Adults communicated with her as equals, and at school she was ahead of her peers in development, which indicated her ability to understand her actions. All the father's efforts proved futile, and his applications were rejected. It was decided to sentence Jamie according to adult standards. It was about a serious punishment. It was decided to conduct separate court proceedings for each participant. The medical expert presented an official opinion to the court on the key circumstances of the incident with Cheryl. In his opinion, everything lasted about 20 minutes. The woman lost consciousness due to the injuries suffered and then died. However, it was extremely difficult to determine the exact role of each of the young people in this incident. It is known that Jamie had a tool, but Caleb probably did not remain idle either. It was suspected that the young man helped his girlfriend by holding the victim from behind. However, no DNA traces and fingerprints of Caleb were found on Cheryl despite his injury. The theory was considered that he might have proceeded carefully. Young Jamie and her boyfriend continued to deny their involvement in the incident in the car. The main prosecution witness was a close friend of Jamie. According to her statement, they had talked a week before the incident, and Jamie had shared her concerns. She complained about her mother's lack of understanding and feared having to separate from her boyfriend. Jamie even mentioned the thought of getting rid of her mother and was worried about the success of this endeavor. The friend reported that Jamie and Caleb had originally planned for him to carry out the plan. Given his age, however, this was risky. The young man could have ended up behind bars for a long time. After a discussion, they decided that Jamie should act herself. The young people believed that due to her young age, she might escape punishment. Unfortunately, the friend did not take these words seriously and did not inform the authorities. In a later conversation, the couple discussed the choice of means to implement the plan. The friend, not believing her ears, asked for clarification. When Jamie noticed her confusion, she waved it off and called everything a failed joke. Therefore, the friend paid no attention to this conversation and assumed that Jamie was simply angry with her mother and therefore joked so strangely. But a few days later, the inevitable happened. As so often, the tragedy could have been prevented, but no one believed the words of the young perpetrator. During the preparation for the trial, new disturbing details came to light. At least 4 neighbors of the Silvennik family heard an interrupted car horn around 1 o'clock at night. At this time, Cheryl's car was parked in front of the house. For about 20 minutes, strange noises could be heard from the car. Then it became quiet and the car drove away. Thanks to these witness statements, the investigators could better understand what had happened that night. It turned out that the incident had not taken place at the pond where the car was found, but directly in front of Cheryl's house. Unfortunately, none of the neighbors intervened and chased away the perpetrators. The family father was sleeping soundly at this time due to sleeping pills and heard nothing. After the incident, the young daughter and her older boyfriend drove away with Cheryl's car. Their plan did not work out, and they had to improvise. They left the car at the pond and tried to erase traces of their actions. After that, the couple drove to a fast food restaurant as if nothing had happened. Later, they bought cleaning supplies and returned to the car, but even failed at that. After hastily trying to eliminate traces inside the vehicle, they fled. If the car had not gotten stuck in the mud, the events could have developed quite differently. The search could have dragged on for a long time, and this might have endangered Jamie's father's safety. After another meeting with the prosecutors before court, Jamie decided to confess her guilt in a serious incident, conspiracy and evidence manipulation. According to Jamie, the reason was Cheryl's prohibition to meet with her boyfriend. The woman wanted the best for her daughter, but the situation escalated when she threatened to contact the authorities if Caleb would not give up. Jamie feared the consequences for Caleb if Cheryl learned about her condition. Finally, the young people decided on drastic measures. After her confession, Jamie received a long prison sentence with the possibility of review after 35 years. She will have the chance to be released at 49 years old, only 5 years younger than her mother was at the time of the tragedy. Subsequently, the trial against Caleb began. He was accused of inappropriate relationship with a minor, participation in the incident, and attempting to obstruct the investigation. Caleb's lawyer exploited the sentence imposed on Jamie. This allowed Caleb to shift the main responsibility to the young woman and only admitted to aiding and evidence concealment. Another argument of the defense was Jamie's condition. According to the lawyer, the mother caught them together in the car and became angry. An argument ensued, and Caleb, who knew about Jamie's pregnancy, tried to protect her. During the court hearing, Caleb remained calm and often smiled as he presented his version of the events. His narrative differed greatly from what he had told the investigators during the first interrogations. The true picture of the incident in the car still raises questions, since neither on the alleged murder weapon nor on Cheryl were DNA traces of Caleb found. The prosecution could only rely on a statement that indicated the young man's involvement in the incident with the woman. From the correspondence with Jamie, it emerged that Caleb feared the woman might go to the police. The young man had a strong motive, especially given the delicate situation of the young woman, which complicated the situation. The jury was shown the couple's correspondence, including Caleb's message, "I have chosen sharp objects," which demonstrated the seriousness of his intentions. These arguments proved convincing. Caleb Barnes was found guilty on all charges, including a serious crime, evidence concealment, and inappropriate behavior toward a minor. He was sentenced to a long prison term without possibility of early release, plus 44 years for other charges. In the year 2023, the case took a new turn. Jamie's lawyer demanded a review and accused the law enforcement agencies of ineffective investigation and disregard of evidence in favor of the young client. It was suspected that Jamie had acted under the influence of an unstable condition and her situation. A new version emerged. According to Jamie, Caleb was the initiator of the incident and had pushed the young woman to decisive actions. The defendant claimed that her boyfriend had skillfully manipulated her, but she had long resisted his influence. Finally, he had exerted pressure. Jamie insisted that she had become the victim of the young man who had forced her to commit a terrible act against her mother. The lawyer presented this convincingly because it involved an inexperienced student who had gotten involved with a significantly older man from whom she was even expecting a child. Jamie explained that she had previously remained silent out of fear of retaliation from her boyfriend. Now that he was in custody, she wanted to restore justice. However, her new version of events contradicts the chat history with her boyfriend. In the messages, the young woman herself actively insisted on eliminating the mother. So far, there is no final decision on the reopening of these cases. Be that as it may, Jamie became the youngest woman in Lehigh County to be convicted of such a serious offense.